I'm here with some more Saints in armour. This one's the Battle of the White Mountain. The first one in the... I think it's the first one in the set. It's certainly the first one in the playbook, but I didn't play it first because it looked more complicated than Fleurus. Slightly larger, and the terrain is significantly gnarlier. And I thought, I'll give Fleurus a go because it looks nice and flat and straight, a bit smaller, a bit more straightforward. Here we have an attack versus defence kind of set piece battle where a qualitatively massively superior Catholic force is trying to get up some steep slopes to get in the face of fairly average, an extremely average Bohemian Protestant force with some backed up by some rather uncooperative or untrustworthy allies. So what we have here, if we look down here, is that these are the Catholic force. The stuff with the blue stripes, that's the Catholic League forces. That's a wing being led by Tilly, with an army commander called Maximilian. So they've got two army commanders in this battle. They've got one for the Catholic League forces and one for the Walloon, sort of Belgian, Spanish, Italian kind of contingent of their army. So it's kind of split half and half. This wing, the blue-topped wing led by Tilly, and the army commander is Maximilian there. And you can see already that they're set up in some pretty rough terrain. In this era, anything that's formed up trying to march up steep slopes or through woods or through towns or through gardens or through anything takes formation hits unless it's in open order. And you can see open order markers on the top of the double-sized infantry there, and where possible I've placed them underneath, so those doubled up counters you can see at the back there, well, that's because there's an open order marker underneath them. And then starting under charge orders over on this sort of Catholic right flank, there's sort of three lines of various Walloons and Spaniards and some Italians under there as well. Again, lots of open order in there. And they are trying to get up these steep slopes and through over some of this sort of fortifications into this Bohemian Protestant force, which is laid out very neatly across the mountain there. And then behind them are a wing of Transylvanian cavalry, who will only decide to fight on a die roll. I can't remember. They have to make a die roll when you attempt to activate them. They come into play on a 7, 8 or 9 apparently. On a 4 or 5 or 6 they sit there and shake their heads, and on a 0 through 3 they leave the field. So historically they left the field at a crucial point in the battle, and that completely shattered was one of the factors, apart from the fact that they were being roughed up by a far superior army. That was another factor, the Transylvanians suddenly deciding to depart didn't do the morale of these troops any good at all. And just a word on the quality of the troops here. So if we look at that unit there, and that's about the best infantry unit that the Protestants can put together. What am I looking at? Low and low, 25, 11, 12. Let's see. So that should be this fella in here. Yes, it is. Good. Okay, so you can see that it's 10 strength and 6 morale. So if I grab this one, if these two units were fighting each other in some way, shape or form like this, they're both 10 size, 6 morale, and in melee combat that would be an even fight. There's no sort of bonuses for defending or anything. That's just a coin toss. So on a D10 the attacker would win on a 5 to 9 and the defender would win on a 0 through 4. And on a 0 the attacker would be completely destroyed, on a 9 the defender would be completely destroyed, and so on. It's a completely symmetrical melee combat table. So if we now look at some of the Catholic infantry and place that up against this, just to illustrate what the level of superiority is, you can see that this unit here, were that attacking, all else being equal, well, clearly not equal, against size 10 and morale 6, it is size 28 and morale 8. The size 28 is greater than 2 to 1, that would give it a +1. The morale 8 against morale 6 would give it another +2, and that would be +3. And so instead of being a coin toss, this is now 80-20. This is 80-20 in the Catholic advantage, which means that this unit gets destroyed 40% of the time, gets routed or has to retreat away 40% of the time, and actually holds its ground and drives this unit back 20% of the time. And if we throw the superior leadership of the Catholic forces in as well, it becomes 90-10. This unit's dead 50% of the time, retreating 40% of the time, and successfully driving this unit back 10% of the time. So you can see qualitatively that this this Protestant army has got an extremely tough time of it holding its own in any way, shape or form. So the factors they have in their advantage are the terrain. So a lot of this has to start in open order, so that the Catholics have got to get their army up into sort of fighting positions, and then reform it so that it can fight, and then get a charge order into play so that it can attack, if they're doing things by the book and making the most of their advantages. The second thing that they have sort of going for them is that time is very restricted in this scenario. There's only 7 turns of it. And the third thing they've got in their favour is that the Catholics have got an awful lot to do to win into by the victory conditions. If the Catholics need 111 victory points just to draw, the winning margin for Catholics is 131, and decisive victory is 156. So that Catholic force has to be slaughtering this Protestant force by the bucket load just to get a draw, and it has to be doing it very quickly and very efficiently. We've got some quite dramatic lighting on here at the moment. I'm quite liking that. This is my second battle in the Musket and Pike series. I am undoubtedly going to continue making some mistakes, but I've started a lot of the Catholics in open order to allow them to move without taking formation hits. Obviously there's some flatter ground over here on where these units are under charge orders, so that gives us these units some chance to move in into this sort of round in these kind of areas and start threatening these flanks. And meanwhile Tilly is going to try and pick his way through these woods and up through this sort of slightly more difficult terrain, and see if he can form up somewhere where he can put some threat on the frontal lines of the Bohemians up here. Yeah, that's roughly the plan. Let's see whether I can execute it in any reasonable way. White Mountain, end of turn 1 in Saints in Armour, and remember the Protestants all start finished, so they don't really get a turn 1. There's only half a turn really, which is the Catholics moving up. So here the right flank has moved to engage the Catholic forces. It's not been a great start for them. They tried to take out this artillery piece and the musketeers underneath, and were repulsed by those musketeers under there. Despite it being high quality cavalry attacking, they managed to roll zeros on their attack and got repulsed. There was quite a lot of rolling zeros on attacks. It was pretty comical. There's a huge space here where there were 2 Protestant cavalry, and the Catholics moved a cavalry unit to sort of attack along this line. There was a counter-attack by the Protestants. They rolled a 0 on their attack and were promptly eliminated, and then the Catholic cavalry came into the attack and rolled a 0 on their attack, and they were promptly eliminated. And that just but there was a pursuit with that one, and so the overall scores were that the Protestants lost 2 cavalry units, the Catholics lost, the Protestants lost a cavalry unit and Thurn, their wing commander. I've got to check to see who's coming back, and they had 1 unit lost to pursuit, and the Catholics lost a cavalry unit in combat. But that opened the space up for more cavalry to pile into, forcing Thurn's heavy infantry there into Hedgehog, and then this Spanish infantry this Walloon heavy infantry was able to move up and threaten it, and that will start opening fire on it next turn and ripping it to shreds with fire combat now that it's in Hedgehog. And there's another heavy infantry unit in there to do the same, if I can get it in focus. And they're just being plinked away by this light infantry from the flanks, which has just put a shot into it from the flanks and caused them some casualties, but nothing too serious. And so that's the situation there. There's been some manoeuvring to try and get these echelons of infantry into better position, so they're going to try and get them up this slope and then form them up into some sort of order for an attack through here. And over this side, Tilly really was just trying to keep his infantry from getting shot up by the artillery, and use the dead zones from the steep slopes to try and minimise shots into him. But he didn't get a continuation, so he didn't make much ground, and that's a worry here for the Catholics, is that if they don't get continuations, the movement allowance isn't going to get them into the enemy until 3 turns into the battle, 4 turns potentially, and there's not going to be enough time to really do any damage, and that's assuming they get there in some sort of shape to fight. So it's really quite difficult. And also you can see a formation, you can see a yellow formation broken marker over there. That guy was in open order, moved forward. The artillery up here took a shot, rolled a 9, bang, and now he can't move, and he's creating some sort of log jam for the cavalry units behind him, and it's all getting a bit messy. So quite tricky. You know, the Catholics have a fantastic army here, but not a good sort of terrain situation, and it's really messy to try and cope with it. Good fun, really interesting to try and work your way through it. And also, there's a sense, it's quite simple in the sense that your orders dictate what you can and can't do. So if you're under charge orders, you have a very prescriptive sequence of things that you have to follow. Find the nearest enemy unit and get at least one hex closer to it. You know, there's certain things that have to be done. I should point out as well that the second echelon here of this Spanish wing came out of their charge orders as quickly as they could. They had to do one activation in charge and moved up, but then as soon as they could get into make ready and start manoeuvring properly, they did. The other wing's still in charge because they are actually engaging, but nothing else is in charge at the moment. Anyway, yeah, the pain of the terrain and so on is eased by the fact that the orders, you know, you have an order, you make the best of it, you move on. You know, there's not so much racking your brains about what to do, because a lot of the time you simply mostly what you're doing is looking at the available orders, looking what looks like roughly the best option for you, and then trying to make the best of it. So that's what I'm trying to do here. The Bohemian Protestant army is sat atop White Mountain rather smugly at the moment, just chuckling at the Catholic efforts to get up there. End of turn 2, moving into turn 3 here at White Mountain in Saints in Armour, and the action has still mainly been over here on the Catholic right, where well, there's not been major fireworks, but this double strength infantry unit, Thurn, here in the centre, lower centre of the shot there with his wing commander, he got badly broken and bust up. I think he's got sort of 5 casualties and got driven back, morale broken, and by fire from this heavy infantry over here, but has been sort of rallied and is just sat there trying to recover, but he's got so much damage on him that he's going to be very, very weak. The rest of this has just been kind of reforming, even though it's under charge orders. The army commander spent quite a lot of time out here reforming stuff, which allows it to sort of reform and rally instead of its normal requirements to charge. But they're still under charge orders, and they're going to have to keep moving forward. Those charge orders also meant that a cavalry unit that had been sat on the flank of this heavy infantry was forced to charge into this fella here, Kaplir, I think he's called, forced to charge into him because that was the nearest unit and he was only a hex away, and that combat went very badly for the cavalry unit, who disintegrated, and in that then Kaplir was forced to advance after combat, which drew him into the zone of then this heavy infantry unit, who was able to put a couple of shots into him and cause him quite a lot of damage. So it's fun how something that's forced by the orders system can set off a chain of events, and things just start pinballing and and running around completely out of your control. And this game has that sense to it. I'm really getting that feeling now. I'm in a slightly larger battle where so you get these quite complex positions, and then all of a sudden one thing lights the blue touch paper, and suddenly everything starts, you know, retreating and firing and reaction firing and disintegrating and so on. Yeah. So that's all. But anyway, that's all happening over there on the right flank. Around through the centre, the Protestant forces have repositioned slightly because of this threat that's forming up. The second echelon of the Catholic wing, Catholic army has sort of made its way up that steep slope and is now ready to launch. Well, nearly ready. They could do with one more activation to try and get these guys formed up out of open order, and where necessary reformed out of morale broken because of artillery fire and whatever. But they're kind of getting themselves into position. So they've repositioned, the Protestants have repositioned to face that threat up, and moved forward slightly, as much as their orders will allow, to try and push a little bit closer to the edge of this steep slope to make it as awkward as possible for Tilly or anyone to get up that steep slope. In other words, if they come up in open order, then they want them to be having to do that under charge orders. They don't want to give them room to come up in some other order and then reform and then switch into charge. They want them to have to come up the slope in charge orders to get adjacent and force them to take the hits one way or another, either by being in open order or by taking the formation hit from coming up a steep slope in close formation. Tilly was trying to sneak some musketeers round here, a bit sort of special forces ninja-like, into the rear of that artillery, which has been laying down some pretty effective fire in here, where it can, where there aren't sort of dead zones due to the slopes and woods and what have you. So Tilly was trying to ninja it a little bit with some musketeers, hoping to sneak them up on the back. And that's the other thing that prompted this sort of slow shift forward towards the edge, was that Schlick round here, the wing commander, realised he didn't want that happening, and just started bumping forward. And then the rest of the army thought, hold on, if we start just nudging forward where possible, where we don't have to come down slopes and shake ourselves up doing that, but where possible, we'll just slide forward a little bit and just occupy that ground. So that's what's going on. Not a lot in the way of fighting, except out over on the Catholic right, the Protestant left out there. The Transylvanians had a die roll to see if they were interested in joining the fight today, and they were entirely non-committal about the whole affair. So they're still just sat there, sort of filing their nails or whatever it is that they're doing, their teeth, and we'll see what happens in turn 3. End of turn 3 at White Mountain in Saints in Armour, moving into turn 4. And one thing that's very obvious immediately is that big line of yellow cavalry is no longer there. The Transylvanians decided that enough was enough. They'd seen enough of this battle, and while it was nice showing up and having a look around, decided it wasn't for them, and they've departed on a, there we go, the dice roll that decided that. So in my rather funky dice tower, I'm quite pleased with that. I've not had a dice tower before. Looked for a decent one in the UK, couldn't really find one. Ordered one from the States. Thanks very much, chaps. That's lovely. Anyway, enough of my wittering about dice towers. The Transylvanians have left. One thing I was talking at the end of turn 2 about the sort of how you can get these sort of chain reactions of events, but one thing, and how you're not always, well, you never feel in control of exactly what's happening. There are some sort of vague parameters, and units kind of pinball around when you fire them into the pinball machine, and they kind of rattle around, and you roll some dice and see what comes out, and it's all huge fun. One thing I will say though, the other thing is that this game relies quite heavily on sort of order continuations and those kind of things. A bit like Great Battles of History, SPQR and stuff like that. You know, you have to be making some continuation rolls. I'll see if I can. So here's the sheet. So there's the continuation table, and you can see that if to continue, you'd be expecting to get you need 0 to 3, so sort of 40% chance if you're in charge orders, and if you're in make ready, sort of 30% chance. But you get your you get your wing commander's bonus on the die roll as well. So Tilly on a -2, if he's in charge, he's doing that on a 0 to, he's getting continuations on a 0 to 5, and Make Ready's on a 0 to 4, and he's slipped into charge orders this turn. He got because essentially the Catholic, the point is that the Catholic army has not had a single continuation in turns 2 or 3, and you know there's 3 commanders out there on -1, -1, -2. And this turn, one of those commanders even sat next to his army commander for an additional -2, so he was on a -3 on his continuation rolls and still couldn't make a continuation. And when that's happening, in a short battle like this where it's 7 turns and the idea of continuations is built into your chances, the Catholics just aren't making enough headway here, and it's basically because they're not getting the orders. You know, they've had 2 turns where they've had 1 activation each, and you need, you know, that multiple, those second activations. Firstly, it allows you to move into contact and then exploit the gains you've made, and you know, really hammer home an advantage or exploit a gap or smash into a unit that's had to retreat and rough it up again or force it off the board or whatever. But this heavy infantry here is now back in you know, solid formation. All right, it's morale shaken, but you know, last turn it was formation broken, morale broken, and it's as good as it can get again. It's been reformed and relined up, and it's now sat there, you know, defending, albeit at the bottom of a hill, but it's sat there defending again, and that's been allowed to happen because they haven't had the orders to pursue it and take advantage. And yeah, this is happening across the field, and Tilly has just thrown his entire command into charge orders, which was perhaps incredibly reckless, and you can see some formation broken markers down there just as stuff moves up hills where it's you know, not in open order, and it was already formation shaken from maybe some artillery fire or something like that, and it's gone formation broken. So you know, these little yellow markers are popping up, and there's one under Tilly himself on that huge infantry unit, but he's had to do it out of pure impatience at not being able to manoeuvre in the face of, you know, the basic sort of apathy and poor command, but as represented by not getting your dice rolls on the continuation table. The Catholics have just not had their game faces on so far in this battle, and it's, you know, there's very little for the Protestants to do here. I probably wouldn't much enjoy playing the Protestants opposed in this battle, because there really isn't anything for them to do apart from sit there and receive charge. And the thing is that you can barely make a case for them changing their orders, because there's nowhere for them to move. This terrain is so ugly that the moment you start moving about on it, you start moving up and down steep slopes, and that causes formation hits. So you want to move as little as possible and force the other side to do that, and of course the Protestants are perfectly placed to do that. So just sitting still, and of course the received charge does allow a fair degree of reforming and even rallying, as long as you shuffle your commanders about and you're not fighting fires in too many places at once, it's really quite comfortable. So it's quite an interesting sort of almost solo exercise, this, in trying to get this Catholic contingent just get to grips with the Protestant forces. Is really quite challenging. But like I say, no continuations in 2 turns, and this army is hopeless. It's going nowhere. So we'll see what turns 4 and 5 bring, and hope they can get some action. They've got one sole unit managed to, and it's in open order. What's his name? That brave fella. Herelberg or something, it looks like it. This guy in here, what's he called? He is called Hurleyberg, by the looks of things. My eyesight isn't what it was. Hurleyberg, yes. And he actually made it up the slope into Schlick's double-sized 10-strength infantry unit, and has been absolutely kicked in that. He hasn't put a hit on Schlick and has taken 5 in return. Just from, he moved up and Schlick he tried some advancing fire and, the -3, and he didn't hit, and then Schlick put 2 hits into him with a 9, and then he's on -2 for the, for the 2 hits, and he's in open order as well to try and get up the slope, and missed again, and Schlick reaction fire and put 2 more hits into him and another hit, and it's just all gone horribly wrong. So he's in a right old state, but he's pretty much the only Catholic unit that's actually engaged at the moment. Across the rest of the field, there's absolutely nothing happening. All right, onward. We're now at the end of turn 4 at South Mountain in Saints in Armour, and the very sedate pace of this battle, which I mentioned being caused by a lack of any sort of continuations, continues. The Catholic army managed 1 continuation, but it was over here on their right flank where their formation is, and their units are so, such a mess, that so wrecked that they're, apart from throwing themselves into reform and hoping to recover and go again, there wasn't a lot they could do. They've just got this unit here was all messed up from combat. Their cavalry was in all kinds of states. They've morale shaken and formation broken, all kinds of stuff. So they've just been trying to rectify this, but as you can see, their units are all over the place. They've got 4 units there. The one under whatever he's called, Liechtenstein, or by the looks of things. They've got that very powerful unit there. Some cavalry scattered around. That's about it. This grouping here that's trying to get to grips with the flank of the Protestant army just started trying to form up, so it wasn't attacking in open order. Didn't get the change of orders, didn't get anything, didn't manage a continuation, and stopped in its tracks there. And then Tilly, much the same thing. He's losing units to formation broken just from moving up and down hills. He managed to take out this artillery here with some fire from his infantry unit there, but that was about all he accomplished. A couple of units of his cavalry charged in here. You can see one back there that got knocked back, that's in a right state, and another one there, also in a state, and you can see, the cavalry that was all neatly formed up is now just sort of scattered around the battlefield. But the problem for Tilly is that the fact that his cavalry's in a state doesn't change the fact that it's under charge orders, and he's going to have to go again, which is going to be extremely messy for that cavalry unit there, because I think that means it's going to have to charge up the hill towards the artillery there, and since wouldn't fancy being in their shoes. So there it is, but very little happening. You can see this sort of neatly formed lines sort of forming up, but neither side, well, the Protestants have absolutely no interest in trying to, turn it into a battle. I did briefly consider Schlick here throwing in a charge order and going on the counter-attack against what is basically musketeers down here, very, very lightweight stuff. And then I thought, what are you doing? why on earth would you even consider that? When, you know, that just means they're going to have to charge towards the enemy, crossing all these horrible terrain lines, taking all the formation hits. That's just, you know, insanity. Sit there on your hill, let them come to you, beat them up when they get there. That's your plan. So Schlick, after that moment of madness, finally saw sense and just sat and waited for the enemy to come to him. So end of turn 4, going into turn 5. It's still all on the Catholic army to see if they can get their machinery, this army, this finely honed army, into some sort of gear, because it's been sorely lacking in leadership so far. That's partly my fault, but you know, the dice have not been on the Catholic side today when it comes to keeping their army moving. Back at White Mountain, it's the end of turn 5, beginning of turn 6. The Protestant forces still hold this chateau on the right hand side, which is one of the Catholic objectives. You can see 20 VPs in that white star there, but the Catholic forces are nowhere near getting there. Again, their lack of continuations is costing them. And they have broken through here, though. They finally got their act together. Having formed up, they bowled through there quite merrily, smashing a couple of units out of the way. And over on the Catholic right flank, it is, of course, a rather pell-mell melee. You can see 6 hits now accumulated on this big, ferocious 28-8 unit here. There's been some. He rolled a couple of zeros on fire. You know, he was firing at these guys, Thurn and the infantry, and these 2 infantries facing him. Rolled a couple of big fat zeros, and they chipped away at him with some good rolls back. And they're making their melee morale checks as well to stay in the fight as well. So at the moment, that big impressive infantry unit's got his hands full, because he's about to hit 7 is the point at which he drops down a morale level for taking too many casualties. These 2 are already well beyond that, I believe. Anyway, it's all a mess over on the right flank here. There's no order or structure to this anymore. It's just a fight for survival. Back in the centre here, there is still more structure to it, and basically that structure is that the Catholics are, this big blue and grey Catholic force is really struggling to get any forward momentum at all. It looks impressive, but over here this is just musketeers. The heavy infantry sort of starts here, and Tilly's unit is formation broken, so it's not moving anywhere. Those are in open order and are going to have to charge. Then you've got some more formation broken stuff, which is log jamming through the middle there and preventing anything else from really making any ground. And then you've got this unit back here who's going to have to move forward anyway because he's under charge orders, and he's going to become formation shaken just for moving into the woods. In fact, he may become formation broken for. Anyway, it's just becoming a horrible mess for them. This cavalry is going to be able to pile forward. So yeah, it's a real scrappy affair, and it's just going to disintegrate, I think, in these last couple of turns, as the orders that these guys are under force them to do things that they're not equipped to do, unless Tilly tries to do something, just miraculous, and reverse gear and throw them into like a rally order, try and sort them out, and then get some. He can't even get a continuation if he does that, but maybe he can throw them into a receive charge, get them to reform, and then throw them back into a charge. That would be astonishing if he could get it done, because he's barely had a continuation all game. Which reminds me that, hilariously, he did get a continuation this turn, the first one he's had all game, and good old Hohenlohe over here trumped him, preempted him, went for the preemption check, rolled a nice 0, and that was it. Hohenlohe took his one and only continuation he's had in 5 turns, and Hohenlohe stole it from him. Fantastic. So you know it's not your day when Hohenlohe's stealing the limelight from you. Anyway, there it is. The Catholics are holding out. The Protestants are holding out reasonably comfortably here at the moment. I did a quick tot up. I'll try and move the camera reasonably slowly instead of the normal blur. I did a quick tot up of the casualties and the pursuit box stuff, and so there are some casualties in there from the Protestant point of view, but with those 20 points of cavalry on the Catholic side, the difference only adds up to 80, I think. So the Catholics are 80 points to the good at the moment, but they do have a unit there that's 10 points routing off the map, and if we come down here, that's another 5 points routing off the map, and they're not going to be able to do anything about that. So they're probably at 65 points in real terms, which is about, what did I say the draw was? 110, 111 I think for a draw. So the Catholics need to rack up another sort of 50 points without loss in the final 2 turns. Otherwise, this has been a bit of a mess, or horrible situation for them. And I have played the Catholics quite badly, I think, but at the same time, well, I really don't know. I think they had to do something. I think Tilly threw his command into charge orders, and I knew it was going to be a horrible, horrible mess, and that situations like this, formation broken, logjam, were going to happen. But he had to try and do something, because otherwise he was going to crawl up and not even see combat by the time we got to turn 7. He just wasn't going to engage at all in 7 turns, because with no continuations, no ability to do anything, these units are moving a hex or 2, and he's trying to form them up and get them in open order and get them out of open order, and blah blah blah. 6 ranks deep in marshes and woods and stuff. It's really, really tricky. Well, I don't think there's a way to do it unless you're at least getting a couple of successive turns. So there it is. A bit of a situation for the Catholics here, but we'll see. We'll see if they can recover it and get something going. Because what I found as well is that over here you only have to one decent dice roll in a close combat. You completely blow through a Protestant infantry unit, and you've racked up 10 points just on a dice roll. So that could just happen here, and a couple of these cavalry units swing in. Captured artillery is worth 30 points, so a couple of good dice rolls here, and all of a sudden the Catholics could be on for a very comfortable draw. So let's just see what happens in the final couple of turns. So we're going into the last turn at White Mountain in Saints in Armour, and there's been something of a hint of a shift. Tilly still can't get his army moving, and absolute genius. He got his second continuation of the game, and in turn 6, and Hohenlohe rolled another 0 and trumped him again. And Hohenlohe's just chuckling to himself there, top of the White Mountain, chuckling away to himself. Look at him, look at him. He's got a big grin on his face there, big cheesy grin, because he's made Tilly look a fool now for the last 2 turns. And not that Tilly was going to do anything particularly. I mean, he can't reform the unit that he's sat with. He can't really reform that great bunch over there. I suppose the army commander's trying, and moved that big unit up there to engage Schlick here, and they took the worst of it by miles. They took a right panning from that particular manoeuvre, and yeah, all a bit of a mess. Tilly's wing has been just barely got into the battle, as you can see, just formation broken all over the hills. But what it did do, though, equally incompetently, I made an attack with some cavalry here, some Bohemian cavalry down into that unit there, that Cuirassier unit, whatever his name is. Let's just see. Kratz there. Well, you can see he's occupying a 20-point victory point hex there, because that's where the Protestant cavalry unit was. And the attack looked decent. This guy was formation shaken, the other guy wasn't. He'd had a chance to reload his pistols and stuff, so it looked like it was a decent shot. Came charging down, as it turned out, because he was only an arquebusier and he'd taken a casualty or something. It turned out to be an even money roll of the dice, a 50-50 roll, rolled a 0, and that was all she wrote. And Kratz there chuckled and rolled himself into the victory point hex. I checked for pursuit, and he broke off and sat there going, wow, that was a turn up for the books. So yeah, technically I could at least take a shot at him as a reaction with Jung Anhalt there, as the arquebusiers could make a reaction shot against him, which I really ought to do, because it's a very important hex, so I must remember to do that, and I'll check that before I continue with this turn, because it could make all the difference. Up over the centre of White Mountain, here you can see that the Catholics on this side of the battlefield have got their forces moving, and although these guys have taken a formation hit from rolling up the mountain, they really don't care. They blasted the artillery out of the way and the musketeers, and they're ready to just roll forward, become formation broken, don't care, and just take that 20 VPs. These guys can roll around here and see if they can cause some trouble, and those infantry can shore it up. So they're at least looking like they're in a position to grab the 20 VPs from securing the mountain, and they may hold on to 20 VPs over here just out of pure incompetence on the part of the Protestants, in other words mine. Well, it looked like a decent attack, but it turned out not to be, and that's one of the joys of this game. Sometimes you just have to roll the dice, and they laugh in your face, as they have done with Tilly for 6 turns now. So can't deny the Tilly a moment of good fortune there, because he's had precious little on his side so far. But there it is, we're going into the final turn. This left flank has degenerated into an utter mess. I've really no idea what's going on over here anymore, other than there's a huge slugfest still going on between some heavy infantry there that refuses to fail a morale check in any way, shape or form on both sides. All these have passed long past their casualty thresholds now, and is still sat there firing at each other. But beyond that, there's really very little sense of order over there. So it's all going to come down to a few little spots in the centre here, and we'll wrap up and count the points. End of the battle here at White Mountain then, and the Catholics didn't make it into this Chateau Stern. over here on the Protestant right, but they did manage to hold onto this Victory Point hex here on the road, and consolidated their grip on the top of the mountain there, with their army commander sat in the fortifications there, yeah, just sort of pretty inconclusive tradings of blows here and there across the battlefield, but it all kind of died out because in this last turn neither side really wanted to risk any further catastrophic risks, losses like this one just on the roll of a dice. No one really had any compelling attacks to make. This one here for Schlick against this unit here was probably the best of the bunch, but there was no dice there, so that's the overall situation at the end of the battle. If I just swing the camera around up a little bit like that, try and get a sort of overview of the battlefield, you can see it's still pretty static over here on the Catholic left. There's nothing happened there. You can see the logjam of Tilly's army under all those yellow formation broken markers there, where he couldn't get anything going at all. And then it was basically the Catholic army sweeping up from this village up the hill here and assaulting the mountain, which caused all the damage that the Catholics did manage to do, and then a sort of melee over here of scattered debris. Although had the game gone on much longer, these Catholic units are in far better shape, even though you can see that huge 8 damage marker on there, but this cavalry over here is pretty much untouched. They've just not had the wherewithal to get out of their rally orders and into something more useful, such has been the paucity of continuations and order changes in general. And it's just been one of those games where every time you try and roll low, you roll 9s and 10s, and every time you attack you roll 0s, and it's been a bit of a comedy of errors. Anyway, really enjoyable, just watching it all unfold, and it's had a really nice sort of shape and feel to it, this battle. Quite short, very manageable, and I'm going to tot up the points. And here it is, just to wrap things up at White Mountain. The scores on the doors: Catholics eliminated 140 points of units, Protestants 30. On map casualties, the Catholics had caused another 15 points worth of damage that was still on the map, the Protestants 35. That totals 155 to 65. 40 VPs worth of locations for the Catholics, and 10 points for the fact that the Transylvanians left, put the total scores at 205 to 65, which is 140 difference in favour of the Catholics. And if I shift the camera very slowly somewhere over towards the water, I reckon we can find out that is a marginal, here we go, 140 points, that is a marginal Catholic victory. And had it been 130, had the Transylvanians stayed on the map, it would have been a draw. But the Transylvanians, at 10 points, bumped it into a marginal Catholic victory. I have to say, it felt very much more like a draw than a marginal Catholic victory. Very much more like a draw. So that's the final scores on the doors. Nothing left on the map. I've packed it all away. So yeah, good game, that one. Really enjoyable. Quite tricky as the Catholics, but good to solo, because the Protestants at the top of the mountain really have so little to do apart from sit on their terrain and hope the Catholics make a mess of it, which is exactly what I did. So no need to go gung-ho with the Protestants. There's really very little for them to do. Anyway, Still very good fun, that one, and I think I might take a break from Saints in Armour and Musket right now and try something different. I've got Reluctant Enemies, the OCS game, calling out to me, which I've punched and clipped. So that could be one to go on the board. And I've also got a copy of Downtown, War Over Hanoi, just arrived, and that's calling out to me a little bit at the moment as well. So we'll see. I think Reluctant Enemies might get a play, although these are so short and playable and easy just to bumble through, and they're not sitting around making me guilt-tripping me while sitting around on the table for weeks on end. So it's quite nice just to be able to get something set up and play through it and pack it away again. So we'll see what happens, whether I'm in the mood for something longer term or whether I fancy another one of these.